everyone. So excited to be here, especially with my wonderful group of co-hosts. Sarah Dawkins is back, and if you don't know Sarah, this is a great opportunity to get to know Sarah. And Dave Snell, Jason Gerardo is here with us, who are old regulars. So happy to be together. We're expecting Charles Caldwell any minute. And with that said, the word of the day is pain. Love to hear, Dave, what your first thoughts are. It's always good to go first.
Oh, yeah. Why do you do this to me, Don? No, it's great to be here and great to see you again, Sarah.
Likewise.
Yep, always good to see you. Anyway, pain. I think we all go through it. I think it's a good thing at times, but it's as with anything in life, there's a spectrum of support. You want to have some pain, but you don't want too much pain. At some point, you can learn from your pains, or you can give into it, and that's really where we grow, is when we learn from it and make sure that we're properly healing from that pain. Taking Sarah's Heal Yourself and doing some analysis of that. You know, what caused the pain, and what can I learn from it, and you'll heal in a much better state.
Good start. I can always count on you, Dave, to get us get us rolling. Jason, love to hear your first thoughts.
Thought about this topic, and I love this topic because it can go many different ways, and it's so subjective, which is the beautiful part of it. As Dave was already saying, I'll start with a Buddhist quote. I love that I use, a lot of times, is pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yes.
And I think that's the reality, is that it's all very personal. And we'll get into it as we get into it about, nociception and nociceptors and how it goes to the brain and all that good stuff, and physical and emotional. It's a great topic, but I think I want to start with that it's very personal, and, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So you get to choose what you do with those signals that come into your brain. And I think Dawn is frozen. So Sarah, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Absolutely. And I chose pain for the fact that most people think of the physical side of pain, the pain within our bodies. But as you've just said, there's an emotional side, a spiritual side, and a mental side. We could go through anguish as pain with the loss of a loved one, and that causes us emotional pain and mental pain. There's spiritual pain with the loss of a connection, whether that's, you want to say, it's to our higher self, to our inner wisdom. But there is that spiritual pain as well. And then if we're bringing it back to a physical pain, McCaffrey says, pain is what the patient says it is. And that was a big proponent of my nursing. If somebody says they're in pain, I'm going to believe them and do what I can to help them to not have that pain. And as you've just said, Jason, it's about the suffering as well that can or doesn't go alongside pain. So we can look at it in a very different view.
Well, that sounds like a good thought, since I kind of joined in just in the middle of it. But so happy to have Sarah here, and Charles joined us from Hong Kong. Charles came back again, so it must have been very nice to him last time he was here. And it appears that Charles and Sarah know each other from the past, so that's great to connect people again. So Charles, sorry about the link being a little bit different, but now that you're here, what's your first thoughts on pain, and anything else you want to share about anything else?
Yeah, thanks so much for allowing me to join you today. And I think that on pain, typically what first comes to mind is physical pain, but when I first saw the topic for this particular LinkedIn Live, I knew it was not going to be about physical pain. I knew that this was going to be about the spiritual pain, emotional pain, mental pain, psychological pain. And I think one of the things that's happening right now on the planet is that individuals in the last 5 or 6 years have gone through a high degree of moral injury, where things have happened to them that have really caused conflict with their core values and their core morals. And as a result, and they look at the world and they think, well, that seems unjust. And you don't have to look that far, and we don't even have to look at politics to get into this, but you could just look at what's happening in the Middle East, and that stirs up a lot of pain for people. You look at what's happening with wars around the world, whether it's Ukraine or it's other hot spots around the planet, of which there's many, and that stirs up a lot of pain for people. And then if you look at what happened for people during the pandemic, where people, we all had someone who passed, but we all know someone who passed away or may have had someone who passed away and didn't have an opportunity to say goodbye to those people, to celebrate their lives for many years in some cases. And that also created that kind of moral injury, which results in pain. And I think that right now the planet is in a place where mental well-being is really, really critical, and it's important for us to be supporting one another to help us get through these difficult times.
Yeah, that is so apropos. And, when I look at pain, it's usually based on a loss, and it could be a loss of a person. It could be loss of an event like a job. It could be loss of something that is physical, like feeling. And how do you deal and how do you compensate for that? How do you keep going through pain and through, and to alleviate it? So there's, everybody deals with it. It's how do they perceive it, and then how do they respond to it? Dave?
Yeah, Don, the last thing, building off what you just said from Charles is loss of freedoms, I think, is what Charles, you're also alluding to, is a lot of people are feeling they're losing the freedoms that it pains them to feel that they can lose something so trusted and valued to them over time. But I'll go on from there and just say that, we've noted the spiritual, the mental, the physical pain. I don't want to think of those as individual because they cross each other. You can have a physical pain with a mental pain, not just thinking about it, but if you have a mental illness, for example, a depression, you can have physical pains that go with it. They're interconnected. Our bodies are not, one system does its own thing and has no effect elsewhere. So we have to have an understanding of how they're interconnected.
Yeah, that is important. And we've got Carrie here today, who's our resident jokester. Just realized that when the pigs take off their blankets, they're just sausage. Okay, that's a good one. Hello, Dave. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Charles. Just realized. Yeah, we got the joke. Thanks, Carrie. We'll move on to Jason now.
Yeah, so many great points. And to kind of go back to what Charles had started and what Dave was talking about, we're evolving, we're changing. We are growing new awareness. I just want to throw this misplaced plug here real quick, but there's a book called The Minced World by Ed Yong. I highly recommend you read it. It's about the Umwelt. It's about how we perceive our world around us, and it breaks down every animal and each animal's perception of the world is different vision, different sight, different sound, different things. And so their world is different because the way they see the world is different. And in there, he talks about pain, and he talks about how animals have a different process of pain because they might feel the stimulus, but they don't know suffering like we do to an extent. Now there's challenges on that, and I love the animals. I think all animals are sentient, but for this study, he just talks about that because he uses examples of animals can have a stimulus, an external stimulus, and not respond in pain. They'll just keep going, or they'll hide it because they don't want to have different things. Now, to jump back to the conversation that we're having, we're evolving and we're elevating. And so as we have more awareness, our pain changes, to Dave's point, where the mental, the physical, it all ties in. So we have a new world and we have a new understanding. And so we're going to perceive things differently. And as this world evolves, we evolve. And sometimes we have to realize it's that Buddhist beginner's mind. We have to think that we don't know it all, because we have these new feelings, these new emotions, these new stuff, the stuff that, you hear people say, oh, that I saw some tragic thing. It was like a movie, because they don't have a frame of reference for it. And we're seeing a lot of things in our world now that we don't have a reference for. And we don't know how to physically, mentally, and emotionally process it. And that's where I think a lot of suffering comes from.
Excellent point. Sarah?
Yeah. And the only way we can deal with that is to come back into ourselves, to actually feel it, to deal with it. But I've found a lot of people externalize it and go doom scrolling or shopping or drinking or take up any form of addiction so that they don't have to come into themselves and acknowledge what they're feeling. But the only way to heal is to come back in and feel it. But we have to recognize that we're trying to not feel it by pushing forwards through all those addictions, and actually take time out and just sit and be with ourselves and ask ourselves, what is it are we feeling? Where are we feeling it? What does it feel like? Can we give it a color, a shape, a form? And then try and extrapolate that so that we can gain some understanding more of ourselves. And that's coming back to that spiritual aspect. And when I'm talking about spiritual, I'm not talking about religion, because a lot of people are spiritual without being religious. But if you are religious, that doesn't preclude you, because religion gives a lot of people hope. So it's whatever name we want to give to that voice, if you like, inside of us. We need to come back and sit with that and listen to that, to understand where our pain is, where we're hurting, and what it is that's out of alignment in ourselves.
Great point, Sarah. Charles.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important that when people are dealing with all these particular issues, that they don't try to do it themselves, that they clearly communicate areas where they may be in pain, and excuse me, and don't try to do things on their own. And I put a comment in the chat about that one of the greatest healing therapies is friendship and love. And the other thing is that sometimes people may not know they're in pain. They may have other types of symptoms, and they're not aware that they're actually encountering pain. And if someone, I think it's important that's the part of the role that we can all play. And one of the instruments that's available for organizations and for people, but it's more popular in organizations, is mental health first aid, which is one of the ways that people can come alongside one another and maybe point out to someone who's living in what they don't know that they're experiencing something that could be pain, and maybe encourage them to go out and talk to someone professionally. It doesn't necessarily have to be a counselor or a therapist, but some professional that can help them identify and zero in on what that pain is and start some steps to recovery. But ultimately, a lot of these steps to recovery come from the friendship that people can provide one another.
Yeah, I didn't see your comment, Charles. It didn't come through on the screen. But I agree with all of you. And, it's understanding. And then there's something to pain tolerance, right? Is like how much pain do you tolerate without feeling it's unreasonable or too much of a burden? And I agree with the peer-to-peer support, just like we're doing today. 5 people sharing different viewpoints on a simple word or single word, and people get more context. It's the ignorance and the fear of not knowing that creates a lot of pain. If someone tells you you have something and you don't even know what it is, you initially go to worst case. Once you start to review it, understand it, you find out that everybody's different and everybody deals with things in a much different way. And it's tolerance of pain, but also tolerance of situation. The other thing that comes to mind is I was always had a fear of going to the dentist because I just didn't like the drill and all of that. But I finally put it in context. I said, well, how long is this going to hurt? And I thought, well, about 10 seconds, right? I can count to 10, and by the time I'm done counting, it's done, right? So it's seeing the next step, not realizing the last step or the present situation. But when there's hope, there's opportunity. And giving someone hope, you can heal. Like, Sarah does so wonderfully with the book Heal Yourself, and giving people the motivation and inspiration to take important steps, and it might be small steps. It might be you might have to scale back on a few things, or you might need to fully appreciate the good things, right? There has to be balance, right? There's good days and there's not so good days. So Charles writes, the greatest healing therapy is friendship and love. Hubert H. Humphrey couldn't have said it better. You know, that's where the comfort comes in, is understanding, appreciation, and consideration. You know, a lot of people are, oh, I know what your problem is. I had it. I know somebody had it. Here's what you do with it. Now you should be done with it. And if you're not, well, you're lazy. You don't care. and something else comes out of it. We've got another person here. Clarification is a remedy of conflict and mental health. Thank you so much for offering that today. I forgot where I left off. Who?
Dave.
It's me.
Dave, thank you, Dave.
So let me start with an apology to Carrie. He did call me this morning, and I was a little abrupt. I was in a little bit of a foul mood after many calls that I did not expect this morning from solicitors. But on that note, I think that what we're getting around here too is we're bombarded with negativity in our lives. You know, so many people, the news is always bad, or I doom scroll and I see all these negative things in my Instagram or my Facebook or even my LinkedIn for that matter. You know, a lot of people post negativity, and that can, quote, pain somebody in a different way than we are used to. And to Charles's point, I think what we've lost is human connection. Again, Charles and Don point out, I mean, that's what we have here. We have a connection with people. We understand somebody deeper than a comment deep on LinkedIn. Because we're talking, because we're connecting, that can allow for an easing of pain and an outlet for the pain, if you will. You know, if we simply go into ourselves, we're just going to turn into an eddy of negativity and just, well, that wasn't good. This is bad. This is not good. Okay, well, we'll never get out of it. And I'm thankful for having this opportunity weekly. I know that I can at least talk to somebody. You know, living by yourself, you know, in a new town is a little, you know, not ominous, but, you know, a big step. So I've made efforts to meet people because I know that connecting is going to help. And I think more people need to drop their phones and get away from these screens, and that will help ease a lot of these discomforts and pains that people are having with the world around them very, very quickly.
Great point, Dave. Now on to Jason.
Yeah, wonderful points. And, you know, one of the things I say is healing is coming home. And how do we come home? We come home through, and then to go back to these, everyone's been talking about connection. I love that because I talk about the 3 connections: connection to self, connection to others, and connection to spirit, source, God, something larger than us, nature, whatever that is to you, as Sarah was saying, you know, we call it. Those 3 connections. And that's physical, emotional, and mental. And we don't realize that, you know, they say we're spiritual beings having human experience, but we have to fully live the human experience. And our human bodies are wired for connection. They don't want to be left behind. And there's actually, I'm trained in polyvagal theory, and there's actually studies that show that when, like, if you're talking to someone and they look away, like at their phone or something, and that physically injures us. We physically feel that disconnection inside. And so it's so important. But then to Sarah's point, we have to come back to ourselves and connect to ourselves and connect to our true selves. Not to what everyone thinks we are, not to everyone what we're supposed to be or should be or whatever, but coming back to that true self, the I am, as we call it in my world, coming back to that original source. And then connect to people. You're talking about that, Dawn and Dave, and connecting with the right people is very important. Connecting, and not an echo chamber, but connecting with people that are going to be supportive of you or help you to grow. You know, everyone doesn't have to agree with you, but we have to have a good relationship. So we can disagree and still, like sometimes on here, we've been doing these shows for a while now together, and everyone in this group has done an extended myriad of times, and you don't always agree, but you're respectful, you honor the other person, you listen to the other person, and that's very true about that connection. And then connection to source, connection to spirit, find what works for you. Go out in nature, say a prayer, go to a church, go to, you know, whatever your calling is, whatever that is. And that all comes back to us coming home, and that helps alleviate pain.
So eloquently said, Jason. On to Sarah, and Sarah just gets it because of her head up and down, up and down.
Yeah, and to actually further that, authenticity has been registered as the highest vibration, higher than love. Tests and studies have shown, and yet so many of us aren't authentic because we've grown up being told, don't do that, don't say that, don't look like that, don't, and a lot of don'ts and no's. So we put all these extra layers on top of ourselves. Well, I must remember to not say that, and I must remember to dress like that, and I must remember to speak to them like that, and not mention that, and we become somebody who we're not, in the hope of trying to fit into a community, into a space with others, and we lose ourselves. We lose our authentic self. And a big part of my role is helping people to peel back those layers and find out who they are, but not just find out, actually come back into themselves and learn to love themselves for who they are, not who they think they should be to fit in with other people, to be liked, to please others. It's about coming back into ourselves and loving who we find. We have to come back to love, because love is the only way to heal. And yet on the internet, you'll hear lots of people being warriors and survivors, and they're at war and they're fighting illnesses. I'm like, you can't do any of that warring with dis-ease. You can only heal in love. So you have to come back in and love who you are authentically. I'm not saying you've got to stay like that. You can absolutely change. And by not being in an echo chamber and hopefully having an open mind, take on board some of the constructive criticism that might come your way with an open mind, thinking, well, is there actually an element of truth in what that person's saying? And be kind to yourself. Look at it through the eyes of love and compassion, in the hopes that you can find who you are authentically, and then love yourself.
Couldn't agree more. Charles?
Well, Dawn, I actually have a question for you. I'm curious how you came up with the idea of having a LinkedIn Live on pain.
Well, that's
What
a good
was the background
question.
to that?
Actually, I reached out to Sarah and said, can you suggest a word? And Sarah suggested a word, and I thought, what a great word. And it's never where the word we start with or what it is, it's how we approach it and how we lend perspective to it, right? A word by itself is just waiting for a meaning from other people. But yeah, I don't want to take your time away, Charles, from the simple answer of Sarah.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think it's really fascinating that we're having this this conversation, and I agree with all the points that have been made so far. That humans are inherently wired for connection, whether it's biological or psychological or social, and yeah, it's I think it's just a really fascinating conversation. So I'm gonna mute and take a drink of water, and I'll hand it back to you. I'll come back in a few minutes.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think love is always a wonderful answer. And I think the key element in addition to love is trust, right? Once you have trust with someone, and that's where a lot of doctors get away with it, is they're well recognized and respected, maybe beyond their capabilities, but that's where the placebo effect comes in. Right. And for some reason, no one can understand, it keeps getting larger every year. I think it's up to like 40%. And, in other words, how you anticipate or believe the outcome will come usually does because you believe in it. And I think belief is so important. If someone says, it's great advice, I don't think it's going to happen, I don't really believe in that, well, that pretty much ends it right there for that approach. And sometimes people want to prove you wrong and themselves right, even though it's negative to their situation. And I think, what I love about this show, and I always ask myself, how'd you do 800 shows in a row every day for like 20 months? And it's because I love the people. I love the conversation. I had to frame it in, what would you do if 4 of your best friends showed up at your door with coffee and donuts and said, can we have an hour around your table? It'd be like, sure, come on in. And that's as simple as this can be. And I think what it lends itself is how big the opportunity is that you can take advantage to get information, get support. And the other thing is having support groups, being with other people like you, so you don't feel the only one, or you don't feel alone, and you start to feel like, hey, it gets to be normalized, which is very difficult. It's like, well, geez, everybody's got it, so it can't be that bad, right? And before it's like, boy, how did I get it? Why did I get it? You go into the elements that have nothing to do directly with it, but it lends itself to guilt and shame and embarrassment, which is also a way of pulling back. Dave?
Yeah, all great points. And I'd like to, from your last point there, Don, I'll just point out that it sounds like the common buzzword today of manifestation. Everybody's manifesting what's going to come. And it's not a new term. People think and act like it's new, but it's a reality of our bodies and how we interact with nature and the environment around us, whether it's a physical, ethereal, or electrical, whether it's nature, whether it's humans, whatever it is. But I want to take a step back and go back to pain a little bit in a word that was kind of talked around, of resilience. You know, and to your point, Sarah, where maybe I'm mixing this up a little bit, but if we don't get out and live our lives in this world and interconnectedness and start enjoying it and dealing with pains, our resilience is going to go down. So that when we do have real pain, and I mean real pain in the sense of something that changes our lives, not physical, but just something, not necessarily physical, but something that really, let's say I lost an arm tomorrow. How am I going to respond to that? If I haven't dealt with pains, physical, emotional, spiritual before, and had these bounce backs, these resilient opportunities, then I'm going to go down that negative path immediately when I lose an arm. That's an extreme I get, but I have to build resilience. And I think that we've gotten to a point where we're doing our best to avoid pains at all costs to a degree. Some, I won't say all of us, I'm just saying in general, we've gone to an extreme to avoid pains, or going into our internal real self of what it is I can learn from these experiences. And we've become less resilient over time as a result. And that's not great for a society. It's not good for humankind as we grow and change and evolve. To Jason's point, we have to experience these things. And the new environment in which we live, of this technically connected, world, we have to learn to adapt to it and be resilient to it.
Yeah, so true. And, again, it takes conscious effort. So with that, I'll move it right over to Jason.
Yeah, great points. And something that came up when Dave, and this also goes back to something Sarah said earlier too, is I have a saying that says, are you moving towards your passion, or are you just collecting distractions? And I think nowadays, so many people are just collecting distractions. Just things to get by, to Dave's point, to avoid pain, to avoid that. And Sarah was talking about that earlier too, is that we distract ourselves with whether it's addictions, and whether it's the big ones, the alcohol and drugs and pornography, and, or it's the smaller ones, it's the sports and the little things and stuff that just take you away from your world. We talk about the meditation, and meditation is not avoiding life. It's a beautiful engagement with life. And that's what we're not doing. And to the points that have been brought up, we're trying to avoid pain at any cost, at the cost of our lives, at the cost of having something better. I see the sign on Charles' thing that says breaking through the results barrier, and that's painful. Breaking through anything, being something that's new, coming out of your cocoon, as the butterfly does, and our old friend, or not old friend, our friend from the past, that was the butterfly person, loves butterflies in that metaphor. And that's the challenge. And so how do we get people back, and how do ourselves keep us going towards what we do want and our purpose with our passion, instead of just collecting these distractions to avoid pain at all costs?
Absolutely. Sarah?
And I'll just bring it back that we have to come back into ourselves to feel it, to understand it. And as was said before, I think it was Jason actually, it is easier with help. We can sit with ourselves if we're of that ilk to try and understand it, and we can go into ourselves, and we've done it before and practiced it. We can then identify what it is. But for a lot of people who've never done that, they need to reach out and find somebody to help them to understand what they're going through. Because as you've just said, Jason, growing pains, the earth is evolving, life is changing radically day by day. AI is advancing at a rapid rate of knots. And technology is just moving on so quickly that so many people are losing their jobs, which is leading to physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain from the loss of the income. People are finding themselves unemployed, maybe can't pay the bills, maybe got that loss of connection with source themselves, their inner wisdom, God, whatever word you want to allude to. And in doing so, they just get lost in themselves, and it's easy to spiral downwards into negativity, especially if you watch the news as well and see all that negativity. It's easy to then have full buy-in and get lost. And for people in that situation, and I know I've been in that, and Dave's been in that, I'm not sure about everybody else, but when you're in that downward dark spiral, the last thing on my mind was reaching out. I was just trying to stay alive every day. And a lot of depressed people won't reach out because they're just not even aware. It's not even in their conscious mind to reach out. So they've got the emotional pain and the mental pain, which will likely lead them to physical pain and that spiritual disconnect. They've got all of those 4 pillars of pain, and they're hitting every single one. And people in that situation really need us to reach into them. And that's where community and friends and family play a role in helping them to alleviate that pain, and that because they're suffering as well. So we need people to reach into others to help them, to help themselves.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you, Sarah. Charles?
Yeah, I just think this is so important, the point that Sarah has made. And this is why I mentioned earlier mental health first aid, because it's one of the ways, it's not the only way, but it's one of the ways that people can actually reach out and support other individuals. I think the other question that people can ask themselves is, how are the different types of pain connected to one another? So if you're experiencing physical pain, what is that physical pain a symptom of? Is it a symptom of stress? Is it a symptom of emotional pain, some kind of psychological pain or spiritual pain? And one of the things that's really topical right now in the world is the rising medical costs. And organizations and HMOs, everybody is trying to figure out how to drive down medical costs. And they're focusing a lot on the interconnectedness of things like pain, which is actually one of the ways that you could actually quite quickly drive down your medical costs. Because, for example, someone that had chronic back pain, that could be a manifestation of stress. It could be a manifestation of an emotional issue, lack of sleep. And these are all things that through different types of very simple practices like mindfulness or stress management, you can actually get in touch with something that's causing you pain, and then address it fairly rapidly and quickly. So even though it's been, if people are listening, they shouldn't get the wrong idea. A lot of these sorts of issues, with some intervention and support from other people in your life, family, friends, colleagues, you can actually turn a lot of these conversations very quickly. As it's often said, awareness is half the battle.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And I got a couple comments. Jakarta says, Yes, the network is net worth in this century. And Charles comes back with regarding spiritual pain, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Rumi, so apropos. And, you know, there's another quote, I think it was Shakti Gwen, who said, when the pain of holding on is greater than the fear of letting go, you let go. And there's a point where you just say enough's enough, or it tells you, or you start to see your future. You can see the progression of where is this taking me. And I think the other thing is gratitude is one has to have a full balance sheet. You know, if only the things that are bad or wrong or painful are the things that register, as opposed to your friends, your family. I went to a celebration of life last week, and it was a 24-year-old girl that committed suicide, and it was a packed house. And I thought, if she only knew how many people, if she could have seen the future and seen what this looked like, maybe that would have made a difference. And you have to be so sensitive today to what you say, how you say it, and who you say it to, because you don't know what they're dealing with. And you could be the catalyst for getting them all over the hump or putting them over the hump. And, you know, that's what's so important. The other thing is to relieve pain, you need peace. And a lot of people can't find peace anymore, because wherever you look is a screen, wherever you look is a conversation. You know, it used to be when, you know, nothing was on TV, when you only had 3 channels, you read a book, right? You went outside and played. You did something. You cooked. You did something clean. Now it's like, I'm running behind. So much is bombarding me. I can't deal with it. And that's the normal way today. You add anything in addition to it, and then fear starts to show up. I think Sarah made a point. I can't afford groceries. I can't afford medical help. You know, you feel disengaged and minimized and marginalized, where, you know, what's happening in the world is disconnection when it should be reconnection. Why are we trying to go it alone? You know, when there's people in the same situation, and then there's so much emphasis put on outward things like appearance, like nationality, like this, like that. Well, that is just digging deeper into a hole that just brings everybody down with you. You know, you can't have an elevator that never goes up, right? If every time you press the button, you go down a floor, you're not making good movement. So with that said, Dave.
Well, again, I'm at a loss for words here, because there's just so much to think about and respond to. I mean, again, like you said just now, Don, and I said earlier, I mean, it's reconnection. It's being with people. It's getting out of yourself a little bit. And I'm sad to hear about another child. I say that I'm not that old, but, you know, 24 years old is still the prime of their life. And anybody who dies by suicide is someone who's been near those depths and dark areas very recently, relatively, and a long time ago. It's disheartening to hear, because there are so many opportunities individually to just undertake the changes that are needed. As we've said on here before, and I'll talk to Sarah's audience hopefully soon. I think it's in May. I'm meeting with her podcast. Just moving, just getting out of the house, walking, building up to running, building up to like what I did was I started walking again. I got into running again, doing something to challenge myself outside of anybody else. And to Jason, I appreciate Jason more and more each week, because meditation is such an important way to go inside and say, what is it that's really bothering me? What is painful to me, and why? What is it in my history that is causing a reconnection to my past that I can change in the future? Having people, to Charles's point, having professionals, or it doesn't have to be a counselor, but I have some of the best old shipmates, and an 85-year-old uncle, I'll call him, old guy my dad used to work with back in the 80s. He calls me up from time to time and says, Dave, I haven't heard from you in a bit. How are you doing? But even just that alone, I get wow, I can recall our conversations on my bed back in high school. You know, he'd come into my bedroom when he came over for dinner and just say, Dave, he'd sit on a chair, and I'd sit on the bed, whatever it was, and just say, what's going on? What can I do to help you? And those things, when I was going through troubles, helped. And I can always go back to them in my head. But the last part is, and I'm kind of going down a path of movement, mind, meditation, but meaning. We've lost purpose as nation and individuals, that we don't have and I call this a cyclical thing, where after the Cold War, we went into a boredom state as a nation. Things were just, societally, we went into a little bit of a downspin. Well, then we had 9/11. Then after we finished with Iraq and Afghanistan to some extent back in 2000 teens, we went back into a downspin. And we've been in this downspin societally for longest period I can think of, as someone who lived through the Cold War and post 9/11 situations. We've lost meaning and purpose as a nation and individuals, and I think we've got to get that back. And I'm not advocating for another war or another 9/11. I'm just saying somebody needs to step up at the grassroots level, through the national and global leader level, to say, what is it we stand for as a society, as a global society, and say, let's be happy again, if nothing else.
Wonderful point. Jason?
Yeah, and to that point, not to get into that conversation too deep, but I think the interesting part is, if you look at it deeply, it all comes back to connecting people. Because when we have a group, and this isn't a good thing, but I'm just saying, when you have a group enemy, you come together. And the nation, our nation's really good about coming together for a very short period of time. We're very good at in the United States, the USA, we're very good at having that common enemy and coming together and rally the troops, as the saying goes. And and I know that Dave and Don know I'm a Marine veteran, and so I've been there as well, and I respect all of that and what we do. But we rally the troops, and we get back to that connection. Not in the greatest of ways. That's not the way. I think, to Dave's point, we need more of that connection, without having to have something horrible happen or having people kill each other, and go to war. And this isn't against war. This is just saying, let's find another way. Let's find a way for us all to connect. And as we're getting close here, there's a bunch of us, and I love that we're in this group today. It's so much good stuff. But I do want to just add one point too about pain and suffering, is control. And I think that's the one thing that this world right now is showing up in a way that we feel we're losing control. We can't control the things that are happening to us. And that's a bad place to be. To go sideways for a second, to come back, and Sarah, you're talking about nursing, so I believe you could probably speak this better than I, but they did studies and about pain, giving pain medicine to people that were severely ill and needed like morphine and things of that nature. And they were trying to find a way to give them less, but keep their pain management under control. Well, they did studies, and they found that if they gave the person, the patient, a controller that they could release the pain medicine when they needed it, they would actually give themselves like half as much painkiller as they were asking for and getting, simply because they had that control, and they didn't have to worry about, I'm not going to get it. And then the stress goes, and the anxiety goes, and then that emotional pain and other types of pain kick in. But once they had that controller, and they knew, if I need it, it's right here, and they had that control again. And I think that shows up in our lives. When we feel that we're not in control, we panic, we stress, we have all this other stuff that shows up, and that feeds into that loop of suffering, not just pain. It feeds into that suffering loop. And so we have to find a way, and it's all about connection with self. I would keep going back to that. When you feel confident, when Jack Kornfield says, mend where you can touch. Control yourself, control your local environment. Don't let what's going on in the world and stuff overwhelm you. Start with yourself, and your life will be so much better.
Great points. Charles?
Yeah, and one of the things I think that's a great idea because there are things that we can control and there's things that we can't control. And being able to get clear on those can really make a big difference for people. But one of the things that I'm thinking of, and this is one of the as I listen to the conversation, and this is one of the ways that I think we can support one another, is kind of pushing back against the stigma and the misconceptions that pain is wrong. A lot of what we're talking about today is not physical pain. We're talking about, other than the crossover of physical pain into emotional pain, the kind of psychosomatic side of it. But I think that it's really important that we battle against the misconceptions that all of these issues, the emotional, the spiritual, the mental pain, is bad, because there's still a massive stigma in the environment that people do not want to admit these sorts of situations. They don't want to reach out for help. They don't want to confess that they have these sorts of issues that they're dealing with. And that's one of the ways that I think that we need to change the conversation, not our conversation here. Our conversation's on point. I mean the conversation in society that says these things are okay. It's okay to be feeling these things. It's okay to be experiencing these things. And we're all here together to help and support one another through to healing.
Yeah, these are just wonderful points. Couldn't have happened without the word pain. Thank you, Sarah. And a lot of issues is because of disparities. Growing up, there wasn't super rich and super poor. Everybody kind of got by with one car. Everybody had extended family living with them. Little things made a big difference. If you got an appliance in that year, you had the whole family come over to see your dishwasher, right? And that was a big event because it was relative. Now, when what you value is out of sync, your values suffer. So today, everybody's talking about Bitcoin. Everybody's saying, get some gold, get some silver, protect yourself against the future, whatever that's going to come by. And you're living in avoidance. I'm going to avoid there because it's crime. I'm going to avoid there because it's trouble. And pretty soon you get backed into a corner where the only place you feel secure is alone. But that's also a place where you start to generate, what am I here for? Why am I bothering? If the future only looks worse and I can't deal with the present, what is that going to kind of pressure is there? And I think the best offset is being in a peer-to-peer group like this, or whatever organizations that make you feel better for being around as opposed to being alone. And a lot of times it's not what can you get, what can you give? Because there's honor and benefit to saying, I'm going to take care of that person today, even though I need help. And what happens is what comes around goes around, and you set the tone, right? You pass the baton and things start to change. So we're coming up on about 10 minutes. So we all have a good segment to go. Got Charles commenting, what is to give light must endure burning, Viktor Frankl. And I know he wrote a wonderful book that people spend a lot of time quoting. Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, I really don't know. I think I'm just going to leave with a couple of points here. I think don't tell anybody beyond here, but I give my ex-wife very much props, if you will, because something that you pointed out earlier, Don, was if there was nothing on TV, you'd read a book. Well, my ex-wife was very much on every Saturday night. We'd do game night. And I didn't necessarily engage in it as much as I could have or should have for other reasons. But that was a way for the family to be together and to engage and not be looking at these blue light screens or yellow light, whatever the bad thing is for our body coming off of them, and to talk and to laugh. Don, you've pointed out many times over the last couple of years how the families always used to come together. And I remember family get-togethers. But as we've spread out, most of my family is up and down the East Coast and a few in the West. So we don't see each other but at funerals or big family events for weddings or something. But connectedness is really what we've been talking about here today, and how we can reduce that pain that we perceive or endure physically or emotionally. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be our biological family either. I've been very fortunate. People ask me where my mom is, and I said, which one? I have 3 moms. I have 2 in Maryland, and I have 1 down here in Florida. But these are 3 different ladies who've impacted me at different times through my life, that I have to call for certain events if I know that it applies to them and how they've impacted me on that journey. So don't look for someone to come to you. You can be that to somebody else, and it will come back in spades. You'll if you are the light will return, I guess, is metaphorically. I'm trying to get bigger than my brain is allowed. It starts with you, is really what it comes down to. If you're willing to expose yourself and be vulnerable, I love Brene Brown. Vulnerability is what really is required, and people are so guarded these days with what they might be exposed to, or be, what comes back at them if they put out an idea. And that's a shameful state. And I'll just leave it at that. I've said a lot today.
And it's all been excellent, all of us, and I can't applaud us together so much more. And I think that's where appreciation comes in, is no one knows until you tell them.
Yeah.
Right? Jason?
To touch on Dave and Charles's points as we wrap up here, vulnerability. One of the challenges people have about vulnerability is that they're afraid of getting hurt. Love can hurt, because you expose yourself and you put your heart out there, and especially when you're young. And man, when you're young, you can love a lot. You can love deeply, and you get your heart broken. And then you're like, that pain, we're talking about pain, and there's pain and suffering that comes with a heartbreak. We've all been there probably. If you've ever loved, you felt it, and that's about being vulnerable. And so people, I think, hold back because they're afraid of, well, what's the risk to reward? You know what? This life is too short to be worried about that, man. Interact, be human, be silly, have fun, go out there and live this life fully. And so that's one of the challenges about being vulnerable, is that people are afraid of that. With that said, I'm going back to Charles' point, which I love that you brought it up a couple times, Charles, because it's the world I live in, about, like pain is a signal. And I always tell people there's no bad emotions. Emotions are just signals telling you there's something you want to pay attention to. Now, we can have inappropriate or unwarranted emotions, and that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But in the most part, pain, whether it's emotional, spiritual, physical, it's just saying, hey, pay attention to this. We have a family friend that doesn't have the nociceptors, the pain receptors in his feet. And he's my age, he's around his early 50s, and he's caused a lot of damage over the years because he doesn't feel pain in his feet. So he can't get the signals, hey, don't do this. So he just keeps going. And that's the same thing with pain, and pain for us, whether it's emotional, spiritual, mental. If we don't heed those signals and we don't allow them to come in, we can't change, and they'll come back much worse in different ways later on. And so be open. And we've all said it today, and that's going to be my recap, is be open to pain when it shows up as a teacher. And what is it trying to teach you? What is it trying to show you? And take it inside and say, I learned this. Thank you. We say in Stephen Gilligan, hypnotherapist, NLP and stuff like that, he says, when you have a pain, it's part of you. And you bring it inside and say, welcome. What are you here to tell me? And I'll leave it at that. Great
points. We're bringing everybody's game up a notch today collectively. Sarah?
And I love that, Jason. Really do love that. And I just want to flip it 180 and come into quick mention of empathy, because I feel there's a lack of empathy in the world today that we live in. And if we can come back into ourselves and understand what the person in front of us, or one of our friends or family members, or even somebody that we've newly met, is feeling, and we can be empathic with our response to them, because, most of us have felt pain in all forms. So we can have an idea of what that person is feeling and is going through. Might not be totally the same, but we can have a clear understanding. We need to come back into those empathic responses. And the more we talk about empathy, I'm just going to quick plug my book here. I'm collecting research on empathy if anybody wants to help me out for my next book. But if we can come back and learn and understand more about empathy, it helps us to help other people to help themselves.
Absolutely. Charles has a couple good points that I didn't have a chance to put out there. Out of your vulnerabilities will come your strength, Sigmund Freud. Here's another one. What is to give light must endure burning. I think we covered that. And also, the darkest nights produce the brightest stars, John Green. Charles, your point.
Yeah. Sarah, I can actually help you with a little bit of that empathy research. I did run an HR survey at the end of 2024 amongst about 110 HR leaders across APAC, and one of the questions we asked was about empathetic leadership. So I do have you might find that data point helpful for your research. I want to just conclude with a note of encouragement for people who might be watching this or listening to this and might be experiencing pain, that pain can lead to the resolution of pain can lead to strength, resilience, and deeper understanding of yourself and of life. And I just really encourage people to embrace whatever they're experiencing, and really trust that it can lead to some element of joy down the road. And it's just out of that suffering that we sometimes have, that the strongest people have emerged and the greatest characters. And yes, they're seared with scars, but they are stronger and better in the long run. So just remember what Lance Armstrong said, that pain is temporary, quitting lasts forever. So I love the Albert Camus quote, "In the midst of winter, I found that there was within me an invincible summer." So I just really encourage anybody experiencing pain to find that invincible summer. And we're all here to support you in that endeavor. And I'm sure other people in your lives will support you as well.
That's so beautiful what we've all offered today, without training, without advance notice, without scripting, because it came naturally, it was authentic, and it will continue to be meaningful, right? Because we cobbled together all kinds of different elements that all by themselves have value, but collectively have even more value. And they always say the darkest is right before dawn. And sometimes you don't know how close you are to getting out of it. Sometimes you don't even know how you got into it, let alone how you got out of it. And I think one last thing is being a minimalist goes a long way, because it allows you to be a maximus in other areas, right? When you're not worried about how many square feet, how many cars in the garage, how many this, you get to come home. You come back to your family and you come back to yourself. And that's where people really need to go. Omar's here. If you don't know Omar, you should. He's a wonderful gentleman. He has the Zoom party show I've been on. He always has Get to Know You. Omar's actually, we're scheduled. I'm going to be a judge in a LinkedIn singing contest. So, I'm looking forward to that. And I think that's one of the beauties of Omar and a lot of people like Omar here, is they're into sharing, they're into including, they're into bringing people together. And I think that's so valuable. It's not what you do as much as what you can help so many other people do with you. And it's always more fun in a group, right? To live vicariously, to see someone do something you've done a lot and they haven't, and you see the joy on their face. You see all that stuff. I mean, those are intangibles. Those aren't things you put in your bank account, but those are things you put in your heart. And I think, I can't share enough love for everybody on the screen today. And if your intent is love, giving, receiving, maximizing, you're truly on a healing path. So let's stay on this path and let's continue to bring more people with us. So I want to thank everybody today, especially our new guests, Sarah and Charles, as well as our old guests, Jason and Dave. Pain will be a word that will now be appreciated far differently and for better reason based on Sarah's suggestion. So go out there and do the best you can with what you got and keep doing better. So with that said, thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye for now. I can't see where I shut this down. Thank everybody together. Take care. Keep smiling. Can't thank you enough. Bye for now.
Or not.
I think he's frozen. We're still going.
Oh. We're still live.
So yes,
Yeah,
yes, we
should
are.
probably end it.
But Don's frozen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. Well, I wish everyone a great day. Hope you're all. It's great to reconnect with all of you, and thanks again for a really interesting and stimulating conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank
Nice to see you,
Likewise.
Charles. Nice to see you,
All
Sarah.
right, bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.